How to join knitting in the round. Invisible methods without a gap. Hi everyone, my name is Norman. I run the blog nimbleneedles.com and today's video is all about joining knitting in the round, no matter if you prefer to use double pointed needles or circular needles. Knitting in the round can seem a daunting task, and the very first round is probably the most difficult part of a tubular project on top of that. So I felt it was about time to record a dedicated video where I show you a couple of different techniques to join knitting in the round and some easy solutions for every skill level. My focus will be on invisible methods that do not create a gap, jogs or holes and are just as easy. I'll start with the best methods to join knitting in the round on double pointed needles first, then I'll show you how to make things work for circular needles and magic loop, and then I'll also show you some easy solutions for beginners, so kindly use the chapter function of YouTube to skip around. Anyway, let's dive right into it, but before, like this video right now to support my work and make sure to comment in case there are any other problems you have when knitting in the round I can help you with. Let's show you how to join knitting in the round on double pointed knitting needles first, as I personally feel it's a bit easier. You can start with a simple loop here around your knitting needles. No slip knot, just a simple backward loop. And then continue by casting on the required number of stitches using a standard long tail cast on. No secret here. The only thing you need to pay attention to is you need to cast on one more stitch than your pattern requires. So if it says cast on 40 stitches, cast on altogether 41 stitches, including that loop here at the beginning. And remember, you can also cast on around 2 needles if you need a stretchier edge, or of course you can use a German twisted cast on as well. Typically for hems, cuffs and brims, I cast on around 2 needles. For all other projects, around 1 needle. And once you cast on the required number of stitches, distribute them evenly to 4 needles. So just pick up a needle and then slip, in my case I slip 8 stitches to that needle. Just slip them to a separate needle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then pick up the next needle and slip another 8 stitches to that needle. And once you slipped all stitches to 4 separate needles, you can place them in front of you like this. Make very sure that you didn't accidentally twist the needles. The cast on edge here should form one continuous line here on the inside. So it shouldn't look like, I don't know, like this. If it does, you need to untwist things. From here, you can pick up your work like this. And now you need to slip that very first loop here back to the right needle and then pass over the second stitch, or rather the new second stitch, over the one you just slipped. Maybe tighten up a bit, and from here you can continue knitting across the first row according to your pattern. In my case, that's just stockinette stitch. And once you finish the row and you come to this last stitch here, you may consider placing a stitch marker here to mark the beginning of your row, or round rather. But other than that, there is no special technique required here. You just continue knitting according to your pattern and maybe tighten up the tail a bit. So I knitted across a couple of rows from here, and as you can see, the tail is sticking out in the front, and you can simply pull it through to the back. Pull it through to the back And this is how our little joint looks like now. The transition is utterly seamless and you can't spot it at all. There's no hole, there's no gap, and there's no jog. All you have to do is weave in the tail on the wrong side. And I feel this is just the best way to join knitting in the round of them all. So, why does this work? Why is it just so seamless and invisible? Well, let me show you. Here I just cast on stitches, didn't use any special technique and just knitted across. And I get this gap here and a jog here. So it isn't really pretty. So why does this happen? Well, the thing about a longtail cast on is that it already creates one row of knit stitches in the same breath. So technically speaking, you cannot join that first row and your cast on edge in the round, and this creates the gap. And on top of that, you are knitting in an upward spiral. So this creates the jog, and by passing that stitch over, you connect the first row, and by slipping that stitch on top of that, you avoid the jog, and that is what makes things so seamless. But this is very important knowledge, because when you use a different cast on, say a knitted cast on or a back loop cast on, that does not create a first row of stitches in the same breath, this method here won't work in a similar manner. So how do you join knitting in the round on circular needles? Well, it's actually the exact same technique. So again, you start your longtail cast on with a simple loop, and then you cast on the required number of stitches, either around 1 or 2 needles, depending on your pattern. And remember, you need to cast on 1 additional stitch, just the way I just showed you. And once you cast on the required number of stitches, slide them to the middle of your cable. And then pull out the cable here right in the middle, so you have an equal number of stitches on both sides. One side obviously has 1 more stitch. And then pull out your cable and slide these stitches back to the needles. Make sure that you don't accidentally twist the stitches around. So here, this shouldn't be twisted. And then bring the stitches all the way back to the very tip of your needle. So like this. Tighten this up. This is the way things should look like now. And from here you need to slide the stitches all the way to the tip of the needles, and then you have to do the exact same thing we did before, meaning you have to transfer this stitch back to the second needle. You can do this using a spare needle or your fingers. Just make sure that you twist this stitch all the way around, and then you need to pass this new second stitch here over the one you just slipped. Maybe tighten up a bit. And just like that, you joined your knitting in the round. And from here you can continue knitting according to your regular magic loop technique. So pull out that needle and start knitting across. So it's exactly the same technique as before. The only difference is that you are using 2 needles. By the way, comment below if you want me to record a full magic loop tutorial for knitting in the round. So a couple of rounds later, this is how things look like now. Again, you will have to bring the tail to the back and weave it in later on, but otherwise you can join knitting in the round using circular needles with this technique as well, and you won't end up with a gap here or jogs or whatever. Now, I know a lot of people struggle with that first round, especially if you need to cast on hundreds of stitches and not just 40. What will happen is that you accidentally twist the stitches and then you don't end up with a nice little loop, but with a figure of 8, and that's actually not what you want, and you have to unravel things, and this can be quite a bother. But here is a solution for that problem that works rather well. Instead of joining in the round right away, you can knit your project flat for 3 or 4 rows. If you want to do that, remember that you need to translate your pattern first. So if you want to knit garter stitch in the round, you have to alternate between knit and purl rounds. But when you knit flat, you simply knit across. And once you knit across those 3 or 4 rows, you simply distribute your stitches to your 3 or 4 needles. And once you distributed the stitches evenly to 4 needles, you simply pick up your working yarn, and start knitting in the round without any special technique. And the advantage of this is because you knitted 4 rows already, or 3, a twist will be so much more noticeable, and it's actually quite impossible to do. So you just start knitting in the round, so no special technique, just make sure to tighten up those first 2 stitches, and then you knit across according to your pattern. And when you come across the gap, there is no special technique at all. The only thing I need to remember is that I'm knitting garter stitch in the round, and this means I have to alternate between knit and purl rows, but or rounds rather. But if you do stockinette stitch, you just knit across, but there's no special technique here. What we will have to do later on, and I'm going to show you in a second, is we need to seam that gap here. So a couple of rows later, this is how things look like. Now you end up with this gap here, and you probably want to close that. And you can do that using a simple mattress stitch for garter stitch. I'll link you my full tutorial up in here. So you need to find the very first or very last cast on stitch and go underneath that. And then here on the other side, there's always a bottom and a top purl bump, and we need to go underneath that top purl bump like so. And here on the other side, here is the top purl bump, and that's the bottom purl bump, and you need to go underneath that, pull tight, and you already closed the gap. And now you can just hide the rest of the tail on the back side, and you join things in the round. Now obviously this is garter stitch in the round, so you will always end up with a little jog here. That's nothing you can avoid regardless of which joining method you employ. So I really feel this is a very viable joining in the round method for beginners who struggle with twisting the stitches in the first round. So is this all? Or are there any secret tips for joining knitting in the round you should be aware of? Well, of course there are. First of all, some people watching this might be inclined to look at their old projects and see all those avoidable jogs and gaps, but the truth is you might still be able to fix them. Because instead of all that slipping business, you can also just knit across that first row without any special technique. And later on, you thread the tail on a tapestry needle. And now, here on the other side of the gap, see, this is your cast on edge, and there's always little V's here. And you need to find that very first V here and pull your tail underneath it. And then you need to find the V here, the last V here on the other side, and go underneath that as well. And then you can pull tight. And there you go. Let's have a look. That's how things look like now. So as you can see, you created a very invisible join, and then you can later on weave in the rest of the tail on the other side. So it will be just as invisible. The second alternative I want to show you is similar to the very first version I showed you, but comes with a little twist. So you start with a simple loop, and then you cast on 3 stitches. And then you pick up a second needle, and cast on the remaining number of stitches around 2 needles. So see, you have 4 stitches, 1 loop, and 3 stitches around 1 needle, and then you continue by casting on around 2 needles. And once there are only 3 stitches left, you cast on these 3 stitches around 1 needle only as well. So your cast on should look like this, with 4 stitches here and 3 stitches here, and the majority of the stitches cast on around 2 needles. And from here you pull out the second needle and distribute these stitches to 4 needles, just the way we did before. And once you distributed all stitches to 4 needles, you slip that first loop back to the last needle. So again, you need to cast on 1 more stitch than your pattern requires. And then you pick up your 5th needle and continue knitting across the first row. Just knit stitches or whatever your pattern asks for. And when you come across that slipped stitch and the last stitch of your cast on, you knit these 2 stitches together. Knit them together. And then you're ready to start your first round. So tighten up. And here's what you need to do. You need to slip the first stitch. Slip the first stitch. Then you need to find your little tail. And then you need to knit the next 3 stitches with 2 strands held together. So like this. The next 3 stitches. Then you can drop the tail. Make sure that you don't accidentally continue knitting with your tail. And then continue knitting according to your pattern. And that's already it. So I knitted across a couple of more rows, and this is how this join looks like now. So as you can see, there is no gap, there is no hole, there isn't even a jog, and the best part, you wove in the tail as you went, so you can just cut it away with your scissors without weaving in ends later on, at least if you're working with a slightly fussy and feltable fiber. So I feel this is a very, very nice and neat technique for advanced knitters. Anyway, that's how to join knitting in the round. Please like this video if you enjoyed watching, comment with your feedback and your questions, and don't forget to subscribe in case you don't want to miss any new videos. Happy knitting and enjoy the rest of your day.